Ronald Reagan, the Cold War crusader whose sunny optimism made a nation believe it was morning in America, dies at 93. The nation prepares to honor and remember the 40th President of the United States of America. Good evening. Former President Ronald Reagan died of pneumonia this afternoon at his home in California. His death brings to a close a remarkable life that bridged the worlds of entertainment, politics, and statesmanship. And the word of his passing comes on the very weekend that the United States and its allies are commemorating the 60th anniversary of the D-Day invasion in Normandy. We begin our coverage tonight with correspondent Jerry Bowen in Los Angeles.
Word of Mr. Reagan's rapidly failing health had been rumored for several days, and as reporters stood vigil at the gates of the Reagan home in Los Angeles, it was confirmed the 40th President of the United States had died after a nearly decade-long battle with Alzheimer's disease. At the Reagan Library, visitors mourned and remembered.
He set the country on the right course. I don't think that hasn't been a president before or since that really championed democracy throughout the world the way he did.
It was more than 9 years ago that Mr. Reagan revealed he'd been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, adding in a handwritten letter, "I only wish there was some way I could spare Nancy from this painful experience." Just last month at a fundraising dinner, Mrs. Reagan spoke of her nearly decade-long anguish.
Ronnie's long journey has finally taken him to a distant place where I can no longer reach him. We can't share the wonderful memories of our 52 years together, and I think that's probably the hardest part.
Mr. Reagan's body will lie in repose at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, before being flown to Washington to lie in state at the Capitol. After the state funeral at the National Cathedral, Mr. Reagan will make his last journey home to be buried at sunset on the grounds of his Hilltop Library. Tonight, in a printed statement, Nancy Reagan said, "My family and I would like the world to know that President Ronald Reagan has passed away after 10 years of Alzheimer's disease at 93 years of age. We appreciate everyone's prayers." Dan?
Jerry Bowen reporting live from Los Angeles. Thanks. President Bush, who will attend D-Day anniversary ceremonies tomorrow, was in Paris tonight when he was informed former President Ronald Reagan had died. In his first comments, President Bush called President Reagan's death, and I quote, "a sad day for America." Ronald Reagan's life and career spanned one of the most dramatic and tumultuous periods of U.S. history. It took Mr. Reagan from a humble birth in the small heartland town of Tampico, Illinois in 1911, all the way to the political summit with his victory over incumbent President Jimmy Carter in 1980. For Ronald Reagan, the presidency was the peak of a long life in the public eye. The oldest man ever elected to the White House, he was re-elected in 1984 with the greatest landslide in American history. People believed in his dream of restoring America's strength and pride in a time of doubt, and he had success.
Every promise, every opportunity is still golden in this land.
It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better.
The presidency was the role of a lifetime, but it was only one of many he played. They all had one thing in common. Ronald Reagan was all-American. He was a handsome lifeguard as a teenager in Illinois. After college, he became a radio sportscaster, known as Dutch Reagan.
Boys, this is Mr. George Gipp.
But his dream was to be a Hollywood actor, a star. He passed a screen test in 1937 and became a star in the role of George Gipp, the Gipper, in Newt Rockne. Ronald Reagan's first brush with politics came as president of the Screen Actors Guild. The hot issue was alleged communism in the film industry. Reagan took a moderate line before the investigating House Committee on Un-American Activities. In the mid to late 1950s, his politics began moving to the right. Later, as a spokesman for one of the country's biggest corporations, General Electric, he toured the country speaking on the evils of big government and high taxes. During this time, he divorced one Hollywood actress, Jane Wyman, and married another, Nancy Davis, who became his close advisor and most ardent political supporter. Reagan emerged as the hope of self-described conservatives all over America. First, he ran for governor of California and won big. After 2 terms as California governor, he took his first serious shot at the presidency in 1976, falling just a few votes short of possibly taking the nomination away from President Gerald Ford. 4 years later, he swept the Republican primaries and the convention.
CBS News special report, the presidential debate.
Then he dueled successfully in debate with Democratic President Jimmy Carter. And on Election Day, he beat Carter at the polls.
At will, to the best of my ability.
Reagan's inauguration was a watershed for America.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
As he took the oath, a suddenly and only briefly cooperative Iran released 52 American hostages Iran had held for more than a year. His first order of business is what he saw as a revolution in the American economy.
I shall ask for a 10% reduction across the board in personal income tax rates for each of the next 3 years.
But barely 2 months into his first term, Reagan was shot by would-be assassin John Hinckley. Only a quick dash to the hospital saved his life. Just 4 weeks later,
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
He addressed Congress. He was more popular than ever, and what became known as the Reagan Revolution was underway. President Reagan nominated the first woman to the United States Supreme Court. He dealt a devastating blow to union labor when he broke the air controllers' strike by setting a deadline, then firing them all. To the dismay of the Soviets and many who described themselves as peace lovers in America, Reagan proposed his Star Wars scheme, a multi-billion-dollar effort which he called a defensive shield against nuclear weapons in space. It wasn't until his second term that he met with the Soviet leader, but in 1985 he and Mikhail Gorbachev began a partnership that culminated in the first arms treaty to actually reduce the number of nuclear weapons.
I never took a penny that didn't belong to me.
Later, he was embarrassed by a national security aide, Oliver North, and others, who admitted secretly trading arms to Iran, diverting the proceeds via Swiss banks to Nicaraguan Contras, and lying to Congress to cover it all up. Investigators said President Reagan approved at least some of these secret dealings, but he pleaded ignorance.
I did not know what had happened or whether there had been a diversion or any money to divert.
What became known as the Iran-Contra scandal tarnished his second term, but did not destroy his popularity. Ronald Reagan left office with the economy booming. A recession was right around the corner, but as he left, the economy was up, the deficit was soaring, and his public approval rating was higher than any other modern president. In 1994, he revealed he was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. He wrote a farewell letter to the American people saying, "I now begin the journey that will take me into the sunset of my life. I know that for America, there will always be a bright dawn ahead." CBS will have more on the life and times of former President Ronald Reagan later in this broadcast, and please note, in a special tribute to Ronald Reagan later this evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central. Up next, John Robertson, Normandy, with the heroes of D-Day. Finally tonight, when many Americans look back at the life of Ronald Reagan, they don't just remember the account of his 2 terms as president, they also remember his leading roles on the silver screen. John Blackstone now with an appreciation of Ronald Reagan, actor.
Good evening, everybody. This is Andy McCain with some right off the griddle.
Ronald Reagan wasn't headed for Hollywood when he headed west in 1937, and it wasn't for the movie, it was for radio.
Here are the Chicago Cubs and Avalon.
Sent by his Iowa radio to cover the Chicago Cubs spring training on Catalina Island. But a friend introduced him to an agent who got him a screen test, which won him a meeting at Warner Brothers with Jack Warner himself.
What was it, Mr. Warner, that caught your eye when you looked at that first test of Reagan?
Well, he had his personality projected in what we, as I term it, off the screen into the audience. It come through. He had a good smile, happy delivery.
Hello, Holly. Want to hear some good news?
That film persona, the good-looking, all-American, easy-going guy, fit him like a glove. And he fit right in at the film factory, eventually churning out more than 50 pictures, 8 in 1938 alone.
Ben, where are we, my friend?
High and dry.
Reagan called himself the Errol Flynn of the B movies.